The Last Engineer. Episode 2. The Guesthouse. The kitchen had gone quiet after Hawk stormed out. For a moment, Raven simply stared at the door he had left through. The sound of it closing still seemed to echo faintly in the house. Eric remained seated at the table, watching her calmly. "I'm sorry about him," she said finally. "You shouldn't be," Eric replied. "Your brother has a soldier's mind. He prefers facts he can touch." "And you just told him you were 10,000 years old?" Eric smiled faintly. "Yes, that tends to upset the practical." Raven rubbed her temples and let out a long breath. "I think I need some air." Eric nodded toward the back of the house. "The guest house? That sounds perfect." She grabbed her coat, and the two of them stepped outside into the morning air. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn. Patches of pale blue sky were beginning to appear through the clouds, drifting in from the sound. The air smelled clean and cold, carrying the scent of wet cedar and salt water. They walked down the stone path toward the guest house in silence. Raven's mind was racing. Everything Eric had said in the kitchen sounded impossible, yet something about the calm certainty in his voice made it difficult to dismiss completely. Finally, she spoke. "You really expect me to believe all that?" Eric kept walking beside her, his hands in the pockets of his overcoat. "No," he said gently. "I expect you to consider the possibility." They reached the clearing around the guest house. The small building sat beneath a cluster of tall cedars overlooking Puget Sound. It had once been Eric's home when the twins were children. Now it looked a little neglected. Leaves covered the stone patio. The cedar shake roof was dark with moss, and one gutter sagged slightly along the edge of the roof. Raven brushed a chair off and sat down. "You lived here?" she asked. "For a time," Eric said. "Why?" He glanced back toward the mansion, so the children could grow up in the house without wondering why the old man never seemed to age. Raven almost laughed at that. The wind shifted slightly. At first, it was only a faint breeze moving across the patio. Then the movement strengthened. Leaves began sliding across the stone, gathering into neat lines along the edges. Raven watched silently. The sagging gutter lifted slowly and slid back into place against the roof. The chairs that had been piled in the corner tipped upright one after another and settled neatly around the table. Then the wind stopped. The patio was clean. Raven stared at him. "You did that?" Eric sat down across from her. "Yes. That's not possible." "It is." They sat quietly for a few minutes after that, looking out across the water. A ferry moved slowly through the sound in the distance. Finally, Raven spoke again. "If what you told us is true, how many of you are here?" Eric's expression darkened slightly. "I don't know." Before she could respond, a voice drifted down the path. "Raven!" She turned. "Over here, Doc." A moment later, Doctor, John Bradley came trotting around the bend in the path. He slowed when he saw Eric. "Well now," he said with a crooked smile. "I don't believe we've met." "Eric Scott," Eric replied, shaking his hand. Doc studied him briefly. "I pictured you older." "So I've been told." Doc chuckled and sat down with them. They spoke for a few minutes about Eileen. Doc explained that her condition had improved slightly overnight, something he couldn't quite explain medically. Raven listened, though her thoughts kept drifting back to the impossible thing she had just witnessed. When Doc finally headed back toward the house, the patio grew quiet again. What neither Raven nor Eric noticed was the man standing silently in the trees above them. Hawk had never left the property. He had been watching everything, and what he had seen reminded him of something from years ago. A memory. He had been standing in the garage at the mansion. 7 vehicles had been lined up along the walls. A Cadillac Eldorado, a '61 Ford Falcon wagon, a '69 Cutlass Supreme, a '69 Mustang convertible, a '57 Thunderbird, a '6 O'Hale-Treads Ford pickup, and an old Model A Ford. The Thunderbird had always been the prize, the only year they made it with the round porthole windows. Hawk had polished that car for hours when he was a teenager, just so Eric would let him drive it on dates. He knew now the car had been a birthday gift from Eric to his mother, Rose. But the vehicle that caught his attention that day had been the old pickup truck, the only one with a dent in it. He remembered exactly how that dent got there. He had been 6 years old when he and Eric went to pick out a Christmas tree. They had stopped for gas along the way. While Eric went inside to pay, Hawk had climbed behind the wheel, pretending to drive. Then his foot slipped. He knocked the truck out of gear. The pickup rolled slowly down the incline of the station lot before bumping into a pole. The headlight shattered. The bumper bent. Hawk had been certain he was dead. He remembered Eric running toward the truck. Or perhaps he had simply appeared there. After making sure Hawk was all right, Eric walked around to the front of the truck and studied the damage. Hawk had started crying. Eric beckoned him forward with a single finger. "Pick your head up," Eric said softly. The boy wiped his nose on his sleeve and looked up. "You know what you did." Hawk nodded. "Should you have been behind the wheel?" "No, sir." His head started to drop again. "Head up." Hawk looked at him. "You broke a couple of things," Eric continued, "but nobody was hurt. The truck is steel and glass. It can be fixed." He crouched slightly so he was looking Hawk directly in the eye. "But if someone had been hurt, that would stay with you for your whole life." The boy nodded again. "Always admit when you are wrong," Eric said. "But never hang your head in shame. We make mistakes. That's part of being human." "Yes, sir." Eric stood and smiled faintly. "Now get back in the truck while I clean up this glass." He glanced toward the gas station building. "And I think it best we keep this between us. If your mom or your aunt finds out, we will both be in trouble." Standing in the trees now, Hawk looked down at the man sitting on the patio below. That was the Eric he remembered. Hawk stepped out of the brush. "I still don't know what to believe," he said. Eric looked up at him calmly. "That's all I ask." Hawk pulled out a chair. Before he sat down, Eric tilted his head slightly. There was a faint scent on the air. Howard. Mac. The smell was clinging to Raven's coat. Interesting. Hawk stepped forward and held out his hand. Eric rose to meet him. "You know," Eric said quietly, "it's actually quite impressive." "What is?" "The way you came up behind us," Eric said. "Very few people can get that close without my noticing much sooner." Hawk smirked slightly. "I used to get paid for sneaking up on people." Eric chuckled. "I can believe that." Their hands clasped. And suddenly Hawk's mind exploded with images. A shattered alien ship drifting near a ringed planet. Bodies scattered across a ruined engine room. A creature standing alone among them. Hawk gasped. Eric felt the connection instantly. Too much. Too fast. 9,000 years of memory was flooding into Hawk's mind. Eric forced his thoughts inward, building a wall between them. Both men collapsed to the patio, their hands still locked together. Raven jumped to her feet. "Hawk!" She rushed forward and tried to pull them apart. A burst of energy flung her backward across the patio. Darkness closed around her. Then a voice spoke. "Raven!" Light appeared slowly around her. She stood in a stone chamber lit by torches. A figure stood before her. At first it had the head of a great hawk, then a wolf, and finally Eric himself. "You will be all right," he said gently. "This will take some time." Raven felt herself drifting away again. "Have the doctor start an IV on Hawk," Eric continued. "He will need nourishment." "And you?" she asked weakly. Eric smiled faintly. "I require nothing." The light faded. Nothing but time. Back on the patio, Raven lay unconscious. Eric and Hawk remained on the ground, hands locked together. Moments later, Mac came down the path from the house. When he rounded the corner and saw them lying there, he stopped cold. The Last Engineer. Episode 2. The Guesthouse.